What happens when a store manager calls security on the actual owner? One man was humiliated in front of his staff, but the way he handled it flipped the power dynamic and exposed much more than a simple mistake. Terence Dillard wasn't dressed to impress. Grey hoodie, faded jeans, beat-up sneakers. He blended in, and that was the point. When he stopped by Valera Studio, the boutique he co-owned in downtown San Jose, he wasn't there to be seen. He was there to check inventory and spot-check a few shipments. Nothing unusual. He'd done it this way for years. Stay low. Keep the focus on the product, not the owner. It was early afternoon, a Tuesday. The store had just a handful of shoppers, mostly young professionals browsing handbags and jackets. Terence was standing near the stockroom door with his tablet, cross-checking SKUs with what was on the shelf. He didn't notice the man watching him from the register. "Excuse me," the voice cut through the soft instrumental playing overhead. Terence looked up. "I'm going to need you to leave," the man said firmly. Terence blinked. "Sorry, you don't work here. You're making the customers uncomfortable." It took Terence a second to process. The man was about 40, white, clean-shaven, wearing a neatly pressed dress shirt with a name badge. Colin Prescott, regional manager. That was new. "I'm one of the owners," Terence said calmly. "Just doing some checks." Colin's expression tightened. "Right. Look, you can't just say that. I don't recognize you, and I don't appreciate being lied to. Let's not make this more difficult than it has to be." Terence frowned. "I'm not lying. My name's Terence Dillard. I co-founded this store with Sean Kittrell. Been involved since day one." Colin shook his head. "I was hired last month to clean up operations across the district. I don't take kindly to loitering or staff bringing in friends to mess around in back." Now people were starting to look. A woman holding a leather clutch paused mid-step. A college kid near the sunglasses rack tilted his head toward the commotion. Terence stayed composed. "Why don't you call Sean, or check the owner registry?" "I don't need to call anyone," Colin snapped. "You can either walk out now, or I'll call security." Terence sighed. He could feel the heat rising in his face, but held it in. "This is a mistake. You're making a real mistake." Colin didn't flinch. "Security's on the way." 2 minutes later, a rent-a-cop from the mall stepped in, already briefed. "Sir, we need to ask you to leave." Terence's voice dropped low. "I built this business. I put in the money, the vision, the sweat. And you're kicking me out of my own store. Sir, please don't make this difficult." Terence glanced around. Customers were watching, whispering. The cashier, a young black woman named Deja, looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Colin stood stiff, jaw clenched, eyes cold. So Terence walked out, not because he agreed, not because he was afraid, but because he knew anger wouldn't solve anything right there. As he stepped into the California sun, his heart thumped like a warning drum. He didn't say a word. He didn't look back. But the camera inside the store had caught everything. But what Colin didn't realize that day was who he had just thrown out. Before the storefronts and polished wood floors, before the glass shelving and custom lighting, there was just a small dream on a wrinkled piece of paper. Terence Dillard had written it while waiting in the back room of a warehouse job in Modesto, California. He was 25, tired, overlooked, and determined. He didn't grow up with money. His mum worked nights at a convalescent home, and his dad patched together side gigs to keep the lights on. Terence never expected handouts, but he paid attention to details, to presentation, to the feeling people had when they walked into a space that made them feel seen. After saving for years and working 2 jobs, he teamed up with Sean Kittrell, an old college friend with a background in retail analytics. The idea was simple: create a boutique that carried timeless, minimalist fashion for professionals who didn't see themselves in mainstream luxury brands. No loud logos, no gatekeeping vibe, just quality and respect. Terence wasn't interested in being the face of the company. He never liked cameras or public speaking. He left that to Sean, who thrived on panels and photo ops. Terence was the one in the background, ironing out supply chain issues and helping pick the perfect lighting for the fitting rooms. Quiet, focused, intentional. They opened their first Velare studio location in San Jose in 2019. A risk. But by the end of year 2, they'd turned a profit. Not explosive growth, but steady, smart expansion. They opened a second store in Pasadena, and then a third in Sacramento. Terence remained the silent partner across all 3, choosing to observe and mentor from behind the curtain. The staff knew him by face, some by name. But corporate turnover, especially among upper management, meant not everyone was aware of who he really was. He didn't mind that, until it became a problem. The day Colin Prescott had him removed, Terence barely slept that night. Not from anger, from something deeper, disappointment. Not just in Colin, but in how easy it had been for his presence to be erased, challenged, and dismissed in seconds. Terence replayed the moment in his mind. Colin's certainty, his tone, the complete lack of curiosity. He thought of his mother, how she used to say, "When someone decides who you are before you speak, they're not listening to your voice. They're watching a story they made up about you." He thought of Deja, the cashier who had looked like she wanted to intervene but couldn't. How many times had she been on the receiving end of someone like Colin? Terence sat on the edge of his bed that night and made a decision. He wasn't going to storm in, yell, or demand heads to roll. But he also wasn't going to let it slide. Because this wasn't just about him. It was about what was tolerated, and what needed to change. The next morning, he called Sean. "You're not going to believe what happened yesterday," Terence said, recounting every detail. There was a long silence on the other end. "Wait, Colin kicked you out?" Sean said finally. "He didn't recognize you?" "Nope, and security walked you out of our store?" "Like I was a damn shoplifter." Sean exhaled. "What do you want to do?" "I want the whole staff there, him included. I'm not coming in alone." Sean didn't argue. He knew Terence's tone. Calm, but final. Later that morning, Terence called a lawyer they'd worked with before, someone sharp but measured. Not for a lawsuit, but for clarity. Then he called Deja, quietly asking if she'd be willing to speak up during the meeting. She didn't hesitate. By noon, the plan was in place. The man who'd been silenced in his own business was ready to speak, on his terms. So the next morning, Terence came back. But not the same man he was the day before. Terence didn't walk into Velare studio that morning with his shoulders puffed or his ego leading the way. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. He wore the same grey hoodie, but this time it was intentional. Same jeans, same beat-up sneakers. The only difference was the people who walked in beside him. On his left was Sean Kittrell, co-owner and co-founder, wearing a navy blazer and holding a clipboard. On his right, Alicia Breyer, their legal counsel, crisp and composed. 2 more familiar faces followed. Carlos, the store's longest-serving stock supervisor, and Deja, who'd worked the register during yesterday's incident. The store wasn't open yet, but the team was already inside prepping for the day. Colin was standing behind the counter, talking to a sales associate when the group walked in. He turned, confused. "Can I help?" He stopped mid-sentence when his eyes met Terence's. Terence didn't flinch. "We need to gather the staff," Sean said. "Full team meeting. Now." Colin hesitated. "I wasn't informed." "You're being informed now," Alicia said calmly, her tone sharp enough to cut through any excuses. "It's important, and time-sensitive." Within 10 minutes, everyone was in the back office. 15 people, from part-timers to department leads, lined the narrow room. Folding chairs had been pulled in. Colin stood near the wall, arms crossed, tight smile. Terence stood in front of them. No podium, no notes, just presence. "Some of you know me," he began. "Some don't. My name is Terence Dillard. I co-founded Velare Studio with Sean 6 years ago. I've worked every part of this business. Stockroom, customer service, marketing, sourcing. I've been here since this place was just a logo sketched on a napkin." Silence. "Yesterday, I came into this store to do inventory checks. I wore what I usually wear, because that's how I work. And I was confronted, disrespected, and thrown out." He paused. His eyes scanned the room. He saw discomfort, guilt, curiosity. Some people didn't know where this was going. Colin's face was tight, like he was still waiting to be proven right. I wasn't asked who I was. I wasn't spoken to with curiosity or even basic decency. I was treated like a stranger, a problem to be removed. In my own business. There was a shuffle in the room. Someone exhaled. Another whispered to their neighbor. Terence turned toward Sean, who nodded and tapped his phone. Seconds later, the office TV came to life. Security footage from the previous day appeared on screen. The entire confrontation played out, angle by angle. There was no sound, but body language told the whole story. Colin's posture, Terence's composure, the arrival of mall security, the way customers looked on, the way Deja hesitated. When it ended, no one said anything. Then Deja stood. "I wanted to speak up yesterday," she said quietly, "but I was scared I'd lose my job. I saw everything. I knew who Mr. Dillard was. I didn't know what to do." Terence nodded at her. "Thank you for saying that." He turned back to the group. "This isn't just about me. This is about how easy it is for someone to look at another person and make a decision about who they are, and then act like that decision is fact." Colin finally spoke. "I didn't know. That's the problem." Terence cut in. "You didn't ask. You didn't consider. You assumed. You acted. And now we're all standing in the consequences." The silence was heavier now. Not angry. Reflective. "This is not a trial," Alicia said. "No one's here to shame anyone. But this business runs on more than product. It runs on people and trust. And if we don't talk about what just happened, we don't move forward." Colin looked down for the first time. But the meeting didn't go the way Colin thought it would. Not even close. Nobody moved. The back office of Valere Studio had never felt so still. No racks clicking, no chatter from the sales floor, just 15 people sitting in chairs that suddenly felt too stiff. Colin stayed standing, silent now, arms at his sides, the smugness gone. Terence stepped back and let Alicia take the front. "We're not here for damage control," she said, her voice even. "This isn't about PR or saving face. This is about understanding what happened and figuring out what kind of culture you all want to be a part of." She turned slightly, facing Colin. "When someone walks into a space they helped build and is treated like an outsider, that isn't just a mistake. That's a message, whether you meant it or not." Colin opened his mouth, paused. "I understand how it looked, but I genuinely thought—" "No," Terence said. His voice was low, but everyone heard it. "You didn't think. That's the issue." The words hung there. Then Carlos spoke up from the back. "Can I say something?" Terence nodded. "I've been here since day one," Carlos said. "I remember when we had folding tables for displays. I remember when Terence used to bring us lunch during shipment days. You treated him like a thief, man. And I get it. Maybe you didn't recognize him. But your tone? That wasn't about security protocol. That was about control." A few heads nodded, slowly. "I've seen how you talk to staff," Carlos continued. "You manage like we're beneath you, like it's your job to keep us in line." Colin shifted uncomfortably. "I have a job to do," he began. Deja cut in. "So do we. But doing your job doesn't mean looking down on people." The room began to breathe again. People found their voices. Talia, a merchandiser, leaned forward. "I thought it was just me. You walk past and don't say hello. You act like we're lucky to be here." Sean stepped forward. "This business was built on respect. We don't carry luxury fashion to impress people. We carry it to give people something that feels worth their time. That includes our team." Colin looked overwhelmed. His face flushed, his eyes flicking from speaker to speaker. "I was brought in to bring structure. I didn't realize. I never intended—" "But that's the point," Terence said. "Intent doesn't erase impact." Colin swallowed hard. "I don't hate you," Terence said. "I don't even want revenge, but I'm not going to pretend like this didn't happen. Because every person in this room watched it, or felt it." He paused, letting the words settle. "If you can't lead with humility, you shouldn't be leading." No one clapped. No one cheered. This wasn't a movie. It was real, and everyone felt it. Terence turned to the staff. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to have someone shrink you without saying your name. That's not how we run things here. Not while I'm around. A long silence followed. No one dared to check their phone. It wasn't just a meeting anymore. It was a moment people would remember. Finally, Alicia looked to Colin. You'll have a chance to speak again shortly. But for now, we're asking the team to take a short break. Come back in 20 minutes. We'll be making a decision about the next steps. People stood quietly, unsure of what to say. Most gave Terence a nod of acknowledgement. A few gave him eye contact for the first time all week. When the room cleared, Colin stayed behind. He looked up. I didn't know you were the owner. If I had, I wouldn't have. Terence didn't let him finish. But that's the issue, Colin. Respect shouldn't come with a title. Still, it wasn't about humiliating Colin. It was about something bigger. By the time the team filed back into the room, the mood had shifted. Some were quieter, others more thoughtful. But one thing was clear. People were listening in a way they hadn't before. Terence remained at the front, arms crossed, not out of anger, but clarity. His silence was more commanding than anything Colin had said since the beginning of the meeting. Colin stood off to the side, no longer trying to center himself. He looked smaller now, not physically, but emotionally, like the weight of what had just happened was finally starting to register. Alicia cleared her throat. We're not just here to evaluate one moment, she said. We're here to talk about how that moment reflects something deeper. This isn't about throwing blame. It's about being honest. So if anyone has something to say it now. There was hesitation. Then Talia spoke again. I think part of the problem is we all just learned to work around it, she said. We made excuses for how we were treated. We figured that's just how upper management is. But it's exhausting pretending like it doesn't get to you. Carlos nodded. That's real. Some of us don't say anything because we think it'll cost us hours or chances to move up. I've worked retail 6 years, said Marlon, a floor assistant. I've been followed in stores where I shop. I've been questioned in places where I work. You start thinking it's just the way things are, but it shouldn't be normal to feel like you're not welcome when you clock in. Colin opened his mouth again, then paused. He looked at Terence. I know there's nothing I can say that fixes what happened yesterday, but hearing all of this, maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. Maybe I walked in here thinking I knew what this place needed without asking the people who've been here the longest. Terence finally spoke. You didn't ask, but now you have a choice. Colin blinked. What do you mean? Sean stepped forward. You can resign. We won't stop you. Or you can stay and go through a full accountability review. That includes employee interviews, shadowing different roles, mandatory bias training, and direct mentorship from us. No title, no corner office, just you learning the culture you tried to control without understanding. Colin looked stunned. You're giving me a chance. I'm giving you responsibility, Terence said. You wanted to lead? Then start by listening. There was something about the way he said it. Direct, without ego, that hit harder than any scolding could have. I want to learn, Colin said after a pause. I don't want this to define me. Terence looked him in the eye. Then let it refine you. The room was quiet again. But this time, the energy had shifted toward something else. Not pity, not punishment, just change. Talia raised her hand. If he's staying, I want to be one of the people he shadows. I want him to see what a full day on the floor really looks like. Deja smiled. He can follow me too. I'll even show him how to handle rude customers without calling security. A few people chuckled. Even Colin cracked a smile. But no one was laughing at the moment. They were letting go of something heavy. Terence stepped back again. You all deserve to work in a place where you feel respected. And that starts today. Not just because of what happened, but because you spoke up. That matters. Sean chimed in. This company doesn't grow if the people inside it feel small. Remember that. Colin sat down for the first time that morning. He looked like someone ready to take notes. But before it could end, Terence had one final decision to make. Terence stood near the back of the office now, letting the conversation settle. People had spoken up. Colin had listened, really listened, for the first time since stepping foot in the store. But there was one thing left to address, and Terence knew he couldn't walk away without saying it. He looked around the room, then back at Colin. "You said you want to learn. That matters," he said, his tone measured. "But learning doesn't come without consequences. And sometimes it doesn't come without discomfort." Colin didn't argue. He sat upright, hands on his knees, eyes steady but unsure. "This isn't about saving your job," Terence continued. "This is about making you useful to a place you thought you already understood." Colin nodded once, quietly. "You won't be regional manager anymore," Sean added, cutting through the air like a clean blade. "Effective immediately. Your position is suspended." Colin flinched but didn't push back. "Instead," Terence said, "you'll work in this store. 3 days a week. Under supervision. You'll report directly to Carlos and Deja. No corner office, no team under you. No decisions made without checking in first." Colin looked surprised, but didn't protest. "You'll learn the layout, the language, the pace. You'll take customer calls, process returns, clean the fitting rooms. Not because we're trying to punish you," Terence paused, "but because this is how culture is built, from the ground up. You can't manage a team until you've walked in their shoes." Colin let out a breath. "I'll do it, I mean that." Terence held his gaze. "We'll see." Then he turned to the team. "You all deserved more than what happened. Not just yesterday, but before that too. I know some of you have been holding things in, hoping someone else would speak first. That ends here. From now on, if something doesn't feel right, say it. We're listening. And if you're not being heard, keep talking until someone does." Marlon gave a small nod of agreement. Deja was smiling, the kind that says, "Finally." Alicia, who had been standing quietly in the corner, closed her folder but didn't say a word. She knew her work here was just beginning. Carlos crossed his arms and looked toward Colin. "You ready to start fresh?" "I am," Colin said. "Good," Carlos replied. "Then you're working with me Friday. Morning shift. Bring sneakers." Laughter broke the tension like a crack in heavy concrete. Just enough for people to feel the weight lift. Terence smiled. But it wasn't a victory smile. It was something more grounded. A signal that this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of doing things better. One of the part-time associates, Nina, spoke for the first time all day. "I feel like this is the first real meeting we've ever had," she said. "I mean, people actually said what they were thinking." "That's the goal," Sean replied. "Not just today, always." The room began to clear slowly. People drifted toward the break room, some staying behind to talk one-on-one with Terence or Sean. No one rushed out. No one looked over their shoulder. Colin remained in the room a little longer. Before leaving, he approached Terence one last time. "Thank you for not firing me," he said. Terence looked at him and replied without hesitation. "Thank me when you've earned the spot you thought you had." Colin nodded slowly and walked out. Outside, the store's automatic doors opened and closed as shoppers trickled in. Just another day to the outside world. But for everyone inside Valère Studio, something had shifted. For good. But it was never really about punishment. It was about setting a new standard. 3 weeks later, a woman walked into Valère Studio and paused by the display window. She wasn't there for anything specific, just browsing. But what she saw caught her off guard. A man in a tucked-in black apron was folding denim by the entrance, checking labels with focus and care. He greeted her with a quiet, respectful "morning," then returned to his task. A few feet away, a young woman, Deja, walked over to help another customer try on a pair of boots, laughing at something they'd said. Everything looked ordinary, smooth. But if you'd been there that day, if you'd seen the meeting, the tension, the cracks forming and healing in real time, it wouldn't have felt ordinary at all. Colin Prescott was no longer the regional manager, but he showed up on time for every shift, stocked shelves, cleaned back counters, handled awkward customers, sat in meetings, listened. Not because he wanted to prove something, but because, slowly, He was starting to understand what it meant to be part of something instead of trying to control it. And the staff noticed. Marlon mentioned during a break that Colin had helped him carry in a late shipment without being asked. Carlos said he'd stopped giving instructions and started asking questions instead. Even Nina, who barely spoke, told Sean that it was the first time she felt like her manager actually saw her. As for Terence, he didn't change his clothes. Still wore hoodies. Still walked in quietly. Still kept his tablet close, checking in on inventory, operations, people. But one thing did shift. He no longer stayed behind the scenes. One Saturday afternoon, a high school student applying for a part-time job looked up from his clipboard and asked, "Are you the manager?" Terence chuckled. "Something like that." The viral video, because yes, someone had captured the original incident on their phone, spread quickly. At first, it sparked outrage, then questions, then discussion. Local business blogs picked it up. Some viewers criticized Colin harshly, but Terence's choice not to fire him made people pause. There was a comment under one of the posts that stood out. It read, "This man had every reason to drag that guy through the dirt. Instead, he chose to teach. That's real power." It was reposted hundreds of times. But Terence didn't care much for the spotlight. What mattered to him was what was happening inside those four walls, where Deja was now training 2 new hires, where Colin still clocked in with a clipboard in hand, and where people no longer whispered when something felt wrong. They just said it. The culture had shifted, not with slogans or policies, but with truth, spoken out loud, in the open. One day, Terence sat across from Sean during a short coffee break. "You think we did the right thing?" Sean asked, stirring his espresso. Terence leaned back in his chair. "I don't know if it was right for everyone, but it was right for us." Sean nodded. "Feels different in there now." "That's because it is." Before he left, Sean added, "You ever think about speaking at one of those retail leadership summits?" Terence grinned. "Nah, I'd rather be in the back checking stock." And he meant it. This story wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about a dramatic takedown or revenge. It was about accountability. About what happens when you stop letting silence speak for you. About showing people that leadership is measured not by your position, but by your response when the spotlight lands on your worst moment. Terence didn't have to yell. He didn't have to fire anyone on the spot. He just stood in the truth and made everyone else stand in it too. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else see what real accountability can look like. And if you believe in stories that make us think, subscribe. You'll want to be here for the next one.